Go ahead, Arif.
Yeah, we're live. So let's start. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Hope everyone is doing well and staying safe in these testing times. For those of us who are joining live, thank you for taking out the time on a Saturday evening. In continuation with our series of discussions, the IUST Alumni Council, today we will be discussing, we have just shortlisted the topic Women in Education. So, joining me today as co host is Deepa, who is herself an alumnus of the IUST, and presently she is pursuing her PhD at IIT Jammu. So, Deepa would be introducing the panel.
Assalamu alaikum and good evening to all our viewers. And thank you, IUST Alumni Council, for giving me this opportunity to serve my alma mater in this slightest possible way. As Arif said, that we are discussing the topic women in education. So we have three eminent guests in our discussion today. First, we have Dr. Monisa Kadri, Senior Assistant Professor and former head in the Department of Journalism and Mass Communication. She's also serving as proctor at IUST. She has worked on topics related to gender violence. She has held many workshops on life skills and leadership. Apart from that, she has been active in filmmaking and other mediums of mass communication. We have Ms. Shazana Andrabi, Assistant Professor, Center for International Relationships. She has done her master's in International Peace and Conflicts from the United Nations affiliated University of Peace, Costa Rica. She has actively participated in capacity building training workshops for women in higher education. She has worked at grassroots level with various NGOs, and she has researched on positive roles of women in reconstructing societies. And finally, we have Mr. Atharuddin, Assistant Professor and Head, Center of International Relationships. He is an alumnus of JNU and AMU. He is one of the founding faculty members of the departments. His area of interest include dynamics of relationship of developed and developing countries in international relationships. So that is our panel today. Over to you, Arif.
Thank you, Deepa. Uh, I actually, to introduce to the topic, I believe women in education traditionally have not been synonyms. Actually, it has been a very long, hard fight. The patriarchal setup of our societies, combined with certain cultural norms, have to a large extent held women back. And I believe a lot of people in the panel and outside would agree with me on that. And to contribute to a society in its growth culturally, from an education point of view. Education itself is a must, a cornerstone, if you ask me. I did a little digging about it and looking at the statistics. The past decade or so has been one of the phenomenal when it comes to growth of women in higher education. When I started reading about the topic, I was actually pleasantly surprised that in the last 7 to 8 years, more women have been enrolling themselves for post graduation and MPhil courses than men. In MPhil courses, nearly 70% of the students are female, while in post graduation, they account for roughly 60%. However, this is the positive side. Looking at the negative side of it is that it hasn't changed much in course, in the nature of the courses that the women are pursuing. Women still seek admission courses more in the streams of commerce and humanities, nursing, studies related to physiotherapy, architecture, hospital administration, and fashion management. These have, in a sense, become their forte. Having said that, we still lack in women in law, financial management, computer administration. It does point out to a lot of questions. But the same study also tells us that although the number of women in education has been going up, yet the number of women in the labor force is going down. Somehow the numbers in colleges is not translating to numbers in offices. So the question that needs to be asked is what needs to be done differently or additionally so that the numbers show an upward trend, or are women taking up less job-oriented courses. I would like, Shazana ma'am to answer on this to start with.
Thank you, Arib. This is a very important and a very interesting question, because when I was asked to speak on the topic of women in education, the first thing that came to my mind was that in earlier times, it's a very interesting anecdote. We may find it funny now, but in earlier times, women used to be told, and it used to be circulated and widely believed, that women who studied science in particular would remain barren. So, and people believed that actually. So imagine, and this was created, of course, it was created to keep women out of the sciences. So obviously, reproduction being the main role of the woman in the world in those times, as well as, I mean, to a very large extent, even now, as perceived by society, women stayed away from science, and they continued to stay away from science. So those that came out, many of the feminists that you will find, and many of early age feminists, they died alone. They did not have a family, as in the structure of the families that we find now, a husband, children, and many of them died in mental asylums. They could not take what the society gave them in return for what they tried to give to the society. Particularly women in sciences were held as as being masculine, and therefore not homely enough to have a family. And imagine saying that a woman who studies science can never, will turn barren. So I think somewhere in our minds, we find it funny now, and there's been a lot of change in women in sciences now. But even now, we find that in the STEM sciences, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, a lot of women are refrain from studying science and technology, and there are many reasons for it. One, it's considered women have always been considered weak in finances. It's a very cultural and structural stereotype, and it feeds into the socialization process as well. So when you're groomed and you're socialized and you're being brought up, your affinity is developed more towards the humanities than the sciences. And then as the structure of the society proceeds, you will find that when women find lesser role models in the sciences and mathematics, they tend to shy away from these streams as well. So excuse me for a minute, please. Yeah. So they tend to shy away from these streams of study, and also because there are not enough role models that are being studied. So if I want to be a mathematician, who do I be like? So if a man wants to be a mathematician, he is a physicist, he aspires to be like Einstein. If I want to be a mathematician, who do I aspire to be like? And it's not that there aren't women role models in the world. A very important part of snatching away the identity of a whole group is always the snatching away of their history through their role models. And when you dig into history, you will find that there are not so many, but there are many role models for women to study in science, in engineering, in technology, in so many different streams of study, in the humanities, the revolutions that women have brought about in physics and in chemistry, and the Nobel Prize winners. How many of those are we familiar with? Very, very few. You talk of physicists, you talk of scientists, you talk of technologists, you talk of computer scientists, and or you will have a huge list that comes up even on Google of men. And you will women feel like somehow there is no space for them out there. So it's a process of engineering and socialization and cultural conditioning, if I may call it that, a process of cultural conditioning that keeps women away, that makes women think and girls think that this is not the thing for us. Maybe we are not good enough for it. And I read this very interesting article about written by a physicist, one of the first physicists who graduated from Yale, and she was she was made to feel so small and so unwanted in the field of physics that she stopped. She did not study further. She did not study physics further. But then after a point of time, things changed and she studied further. But imagine a woman, one of the first women to graduate from Yale in physics, and she was so unsure. She was made to feel so unsure of herself that she could not study further. So that is the kind of cultural, structural, and social conditioning that I'm talking about that keeps women away from STEM sciences, if we may call it that.
Okay, the next question I would like to ask Dr. Monisa. Ma'am, to what extent do you think that the absence of women in the development of education and training policies in Kashmir and in particularly Kashmir and on a broader level have contributed to this gender equality in education, be it the student or the faculty? What do you think has happened?
Well, first we have to look at the presence of a clear and visible presence of glass ceiling, even in fields like education, which have been primarily called as women's sectors, like Shazana ma'am spoke about, or Areeb started with, talking about male-dominated fields and fields which are primarily interesting for girls. But when you look at education as such, wherein there are more number of, the inclination towards education or becoming a teacher is more in women, you see there is still a glass ceiling that exists, which stops women from a vertical mobility. Like, for example, a recent survey done by HRD, erstwhile HRD, which is Ministry of Education now, they did an all India kind of a survey on higher education. And they found that it's a common sense. There are more number of women at the assistant professor level, and as you move ahead and by the time they reach the associate professor level, the number comes down, and it comes furthermore down by the level of professors. So there was a British Council report few years back. The time really doesn't matter because things really don't change to that extent. British Council report suggested that out of whatever professorate is existing in India, women constituted just 1.4% of that. So if you had professors, if you just collected all professors, women would just constitute 1.4. This was 2015. And trust me, nothing more has changed. Today also, it's like roughly, if you look at last couple of years, the figures come around like 37 professors. The ratio is like for every 100 professors, male professors, you have 37 female professors. So obviously what happens, men, they reach to the level of senior professors, and then you look at higher levels of academic leadership. I am sure you can count the number of female vice chancellors in India till now. There has been no female vice chancellor in any of the state universities so far in Kashmir, in the whole of J&K. There was one in charge vice chancellor in one of the agricultural universities, but she was an in charge, an interim kind of, an authority. But she was not made the vice chancellor. Would we say that women are not competent? I will really not say that. Would we say that men should not be given chances? We are not saying that as well. But there are certain, barriers which stop women from rising to those policy-making, decision-making roles, and it does impact. UGC recommends that women have to be, supported. They have to be given education. UGC, an entire framework of education, whether that's primary school, from the level of primary school up till higher education. But even look at UGC. How many chairpersons of UGC have? How many women have chaired UGC? If you look at this entire list of chairpersons of UGC, you would find only a couple of women till now, or maybe 3 or 4, not more than that. And there have been 37, or more than that. I think 18, something like that. So when you have this much of disparity, the gender gap is there, naturally gender sensitive policies or response to gender issues in policies does not really reflect so much. Though yes, there have been attempts on part of different institutions to sort of provide education to girls and kind of, make it easier for them. For example, I'll give you an example of our university. If you look at scholarships, various scholarships that different government departments or ministries are providing to students, our university has taken a lead, which we really should be proud of. It has taken a lead in institutionalizing that facilitation of those scholarships. So in the last 7-8 years, if for example 15,000 students have been given scholarships, out of that you do have 7,000 girls. So that's good enough. That's like almost 50% of the figures, which is quite positive because it helps girls to kind of go further in their education. And also the fact that you have more number of teachers at the level of education, which does really kind of reflect the change. But that's not to say that a male teacher does not really support a girl's education. They do. Most of our colleagues, for example, at the university, they're quite aware of the fact that education is a necessity for everybody, more so for women. So there are those factors which have been contributing to kind of making it easier. But at the same time, you look at the school dropout rates, you look at the college dropout rates, and the higher you go in this entire pipeline, the number of dropouts is more. Arif did say that more number of girls register for masters or something, or MPhil, but then how many students do get PhD? And out of those PhD, the students who are awarded PhDs, there are less number of women. So probably there are women who actually join PhDs, but they end up in their own societal roles or their own, personal roles and responsibilities, which kind of stops them or discourages them from pursuing PhDs or finishing it, or even, doing it at a pace wherein the male counterparts are doing. So where you have opportunities, you have a lot of challenges also.
Thank you, Monisa ma'am, for sharing all those statistics actually with us. While actually preparing for this talk, Deepa and I actually looked for a female vice chancellor for Kashmir University, and it took us a week, and finally we have the answer. Anywho, moving on to the only male panelist, Athar sir, this is a question which I probably should be asking you. You being a male faculty at the university. I'm not speaking of the university per se, but generally, when we speak of being pro, female education or being pro female, I would not use the word feminist here, but just being pro education of women. It doesn't always translate to being anti-men, right? So as such, men have a lot of role to play in this. So what would you describe as a role of men in creating an environment in which women can be comfortable, they can be groomed and nurtured? How would you pinpoint on those organizational classifications, or generally being chivalrous, if you may, like how do we go about it? You are on mute, sir. You are on mute.
Okay, sorry. Okay. So as you mentioned that we're probably the only males on this panel, so we need to be very circumspect with what we say and what we suggest. The question that you're asking is that it's a very fine line that one has to draw, because at the end of the day, when we talk about education of women, or education in general for that matter, not specifically for women, at the end of the day, it's all about empowerment. So when you talk about the role of men, I would not deny that men do have a role to play. They do have a support system that they need to give. But at the same time, we need to be very careful that that support system that we are giving, even if with whatever intentions, with the best of intentions, it does not end up being patronizing. Right? So that is equally very important, because as I said, education is about empowerment. And when you look at concepts like freedom also, so for example, in going back to academics, in academics, we have this Amartya Sen's concept of freedom, which is essentially about enhancing the capability of an individual so that an individual is able to make informed choices about his or her decisions. So that should be the ultimate goal. So it's not like that men simply need to support women and help them in getting various degrees or help them get through various courses. But at the end of the day, what you need to look at is that whether you have created a system where women are capable of taking decisions for themselves and informed and reasonable decisions for themselves, which obviously they themselves will have to decide. So as far as role of men is concerned, that's why I said that being men, we have to be very circumspect. So we do need to provide a support system. We do need to address various structural issues that other panelists also talked about. But here I would just like to point out one small thing that when we talk about issues, I have a slight discomfort with discussing issues in general. Because what happens is that when we look at issues at a larger picture and we look at general issues, the problem that we run into is that there are different issues that are dependent upon individuals and localized issues. Say, for example, women who live in rural areas, they have certain issues that are specific to them. There is the issue of domestic violence, which does affect some women. It may not affect some other, right? So there is the issue of violence. There is the issue of lack of infrastructure and so on. And of course, there is the structural issue. But what happens is that when we look at the picture in general, we tend to overlook those issues that are specifically relevant to those who are marginalized sections of the society who do not have a voice. So in addition to these generalized issues, I would also recommend that we also tend to look at specific issues that affect certain individuals or communities. That would probably provide a much better understanding of what's the problems that women face.
Fair enough, fair enough. So if I direct the same question towards a female panelist, so Mr. Athar said of how he does not specify unless there is a clear-cut problem with it. So if you could pinpoint on something, what expectations you would have with a colleague, a male colleague, or somebody who is male and is as an authority. So what kind of expectations would you have?
Yeah, first of all, I would not expect him to be chivalrous, as you said. Chivalry should not enter the lexicon of equality. If you're aiming for equality, if you are at the same level as I am, then that means that you're as good or as bad as I am. So there should be no need for chivalry there. Secondly, I completely agree with Athar sir when he says that support should not turn patronizing. So it should not be you support. Well, of course, they're in a male. The males in our society are in a position of privilege, whether we accept it or not, or whether we like it or not. And absolutely, it should not turn into a patronizing behavior, because if I am exactly where you are, we're equal, and that's how it should be. Secondly, the point that you specifically, I think, talked about when Athar sir said that there are so many women, and there should be no universalization or generalization of issues. And whenever I speak or about gender, or whenever I address an audience, or even in my class, I always say, or usually I say, that for every woman that is here, if I am here, there are hundreds and thousands of women out there who could have been better. Because of the opportunities, because of the lack of opportunities, they're not here. So it's not that I'm the best out of the lot. It's just that the others may not have had the same opportunities that I have. And here we come to the whole issue of feminism, which is a taboo word. So let's not use that, or whatever you might want to call it, equality, equity, whatever name, by whatever name you might want to call it. We come to the whole idea of providing equal opportunities to all. And that's where education comes in. You can empower people, you can provide equal opportunities to all, you can ensure that women get the rights that they deserve through education. So you have everybody from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights to UNICEF to CEDAW and every declaration and convention in international law, every law that is framed for women in the domestic law as well, aiming, and you have the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan in India, aiming for primary education. You have the Sustainable Development Goals, where women's education is made such a priority. And it is made a priority because, you know, when you make decisions about the whole world, you have to invite 50, you can't have 50% of the population not being invited to the table. And for them to be invited to the table, they need to have a degree of education to be eligible for that table. And because women have been denied that eligibility, education is all about making those women eligible who have been denied that eligibility. And I repeat, for every woman that is here, there are hundreds and thousands of much better, more brilliant women who could have been here, but have not had the opportunity to be here. And this is all about, education is all about providing those opportunities.
Yes, ma'am, rightly said. Now I would like to ask Monisa ma'am that earlier Shazana ma'am said that we don't have enough role models, even though we have absolutely amazing women around us at even Islamic University, at IUST, who have proven their mettle in various fields. Yet we somehow, do you think that we lack women who have international or national recognition, especially in Kashmir? And if there is a lack, what can be done? What is the next step? For example, if we know this is the problem, what do you think should be the next step?
Well, I completely agree that we really don't lack role models when it comes to education, when it comes to different courses and areas of study, especially in higher education, because we have number of both men and women, boys and girls. They're doing a great job in their own careers. But the fact again comes down to that notion of visibility. What is visible, and how do we kind of when, for example, a woman achieves something in her field, why does it always have to end up having viewed through a gendered prism? Why can't it just be celebrated as an individual's achievement? For example, just few months back, and there's a big problem with the way communication happens. I come from the same field, and I understand that media does play a significant role in creating role models, in creating heroes, and glorifying people for us. So few months back, a woman was made the vice chancellor of a university in one of the states. And if you do the content analysis of the news, you'll find that almost every headline mentioned it as a tribal woman being made vice chancellor. So there are two things here, two labels, or the profiling is done in a manner by way of using ethnicity, by way of using gender. So why can't you simply mention her name and go ahead with the news like you do for men, for example? So when you kind of create such a hype about an achievement of an individual, or maybe a position of an authority for an individual, it kind of limits the scope for other women who would be watching people like that. For example, somebody watching her, maybe her own students from JNU watching her, and for them it would then be confined to her being a tribal woman and her being a token representation in this entire context. I'll give you an example of one of the most successful peace building models and resolution, which is from Northern Ireland. There was a massive participation of women, or there was a visible participation of women in that. But when you try to look deeper and you kind of talk to those people, you will find that it was a mere token representation at the time of Good Friday Agreement. They just involved women so that there would be a visible representation of women. And as soon as the agreement happened, the women's coalition, people lost interest in that, and it was kind of, it got segregated and everything. So if it's happening in developed societies like that, if it's happening with a model which is regarded as a, successful model, colleagues know it much better than me. So if it's happening in those fields, those countries, it's happening at a bigger level here. And role models, probably we really need to celebrate and recognize the achievements of our own individuals. For example, recently you may have come across these news items. Some of the girls, they got some scholarships in educational institutes outside. Some of the reputed educational institutes, they got fellowships and scholarships, and such kind of news has always been in media for years together. But recently a woman got a fellowship, and suddenly you see this entire social media trolling happening about that case and kind of demeaning the achievement. Why it happened, why was it awarded, I'm not going there. We must really not go into that field. That's not our kind of, we don't have the mandate. But the response from society also has to kind of, you have to see the response is still deriving its roots from the ideas of patriarchy. It is there. No matter how much we kind of try to, leave it or free ourselves of all these things, but it does reflect in all the fields around it, whether it's education, whether it's media, whether it's corporates, whether it's even politics for that matter, where they make policies for us to follow. So those role models are not kind of given a chance to be representative of the population.
Right. We actually we have heavily actually spoken of the issues we are facing, but from now on, I would request the panel to move towards solutions, like what suggestions we can have. Obviously, we have women and men here in the panel, so I think we can have both spectrums covered. Moving on to Mr. Athar, sir, my question to you is this one is a little generic as well. The education and the curriculum, like we said. Do you think at some level, the university courses and the work environmental systems, do they have more pronounced bias, and may discourage women from taking up certain courses? Women may be inclined to join something, but there are certain reservations women have, or the families of women have. So do you think there might be a hidden but pronounced bias that would stop women from joining something they would have wanted to or they can excel in?
Well, to some extent, Shazana ma'am sort of answered this question. It was probably the first question when we talked about, the involvement of women in areas like sciences.
Sorry to interrupt, but I know, but it's always good to have both views from both sides of the spectrum. That's why.
Yeah, as I said, it's I won't say whether the bias is within the university or not. I mean,
no, generally, from the education system, not our university.
Yeah, no, I'm talking about universities in general. But when we talk about women not taking up certain courses, certainly there is a bias, but I won't say that it's primarily within the university. Then you have to look at the social structure, because at the end of the day, after getting a degree or a course, they have to work. And because of the social structure which we have and the social settings that a woman finds herself in, certain courses, even if she thinks that she has the aptitude for those, she may choose not to do those because of the social structure in which she lives in. There is some changes in this regard. For example, recently what I've noticed is that there are a number of girls who are voluntarily taking up engineering courses, which was something previously not thought about. So it was not, women would generally not go to engineering. Same is the case for courses like computer sciences. I do concede that men are still dominant in those fields. Still, you will have more boys than girls taking up such courses, but women are slowly taking up. But having said that, as I said, I keep going back to the same point that at the end of the day, we need to look at the social system or social surroundings in which a woman finds herself. If you talk to, because as I said, if you talk to women from rural areas, and one of the primary problems that they have is that of infrastructure, and because their school is too far away, or the college is too far away, and we can start many initiatives But at the end of the day, without looking at the surrounding circumstances, we may not be able to find an adequate resolution. For example, we had this, and incidentally, as you yourself mentioned, in case of tertiary education, women are doing much better than primary and secondary education. It's there that the majority of the problem lies. So that is another issue that generally people who look into these women's this area of women's rights, they have to look, because in terms of universities, I do concede there is a problem. I won't belittle the problems of women who are in universities, but the majority of the problem that lies at the primary and secondary level. That's where most of the dropouts take place. And for that to understand, we need to look at the surroundings that a woman finds herself in. We had this right to education, which now is guaranteed under the Constitution of India. And despite this right to education, they have made a lot of progress, but there are still some challenges remaining. And there was one survey which found out that in many areas, despite having all of these incentives being provided by the government, many girls would not come to schools. And when they tried to find out the reason was that the men and women had to work in the fields. It was, for growing crops and all that. And while men as well as women of the household were working in the fields, the girls, they had to stay back and do the household work. So even if the government did its best to, to popularize this scheme, they implemented it well, but the social structures came in the way. So at the university level, I do concede that women still are reluctant to take up certain courses, but that is linked to social structures. But the bigger problem, I would say, is at the school level and at the high school level as compared to the university levels.
Okay, thank you, sir, for that answer. Now comes an important question, that is leadership. If we talk about education or anything, it is important to be a leader, be it in your class and you are talking. So leadership tactics, do you think that there is a difference between a male leader and a female leader? For example, I was going through some articles and it said that women have traits like they are multitaskers and creative and more disciplined than men who have more decisive nature. So first, do you think that there is a particular trait? Do men belong to Venus and women belong to Mars, as they say? And also recently we came up with these news that there were many articles which said that those countries where women were leaders, their coronavirus, for example, was much efficiently controlled and all that. So do you think that there is a difference between the men and women leadership? And if it is there, why don't we just celebrate it? Why don't we just go towards the positives of it? Why don't we nurture that trait than disregarding that and making it a taboo? So that question is for Dr. Monisa.
Are women better leaders than men? Again, it would be patronizing what we have been very carefully treating so far. But yes, there amidst Corona, for example, countries like Finland, New Zealand, and all these countries wherein you have women leaders, even for that matter, Germany, probably why they were able to fight Corona better was very spontaneously responding to the situation and taking decisions very quickly, and at a time when they required healthcare improvements, they did that. They required to import certain things, like in case of Taiwan, for example. So they were able to do few things very quickly as compared to other countries. But again, there were days when people would say that leaders are born, or only a specific group of people who come from a certain background, who have this level of education and their experiences have been of this sort, they can become leaders. But those days have changed. We are talking about transformational leadership right now. We are talking about creating leaders within the within the confines of your classroom. So for me as a teacher, if I am not working on inculcating leadership skills in all of my students, and I'm not doing my job properly. So while you are trying to, give credit to some of the female leaders, you also have to admit that there have been some excellent leadership models which have been, supported or started, created by men around, some of the most gender sensitive men around. That's why you have women visibly performing at different levels. But yes, again, the fact remains that that sense of confidence needs to be given to girls from their childhood. Like, yes, you do have, for example, there was a time when people would relate emotions, physical strength to one gender, and emotional strength to one gender. Now we're talking about emotional intelligence, so every individual can actually develop that. So while women kind of have multitasking, there are men who are able to manage those roles equally well. But yes, every individual is different. Women and men, I really do not support the idea of equality. They're different, their roles are different. But gendering of roles is, or the social constructs, is where the problem lies. But if you look at their skills, their potential, their competency level as individuals, there are few qualities in one individual, could be male, could be female, which kind of reflects a positive kind of an aura. And there have been terrible women leaders around the world, in politics, in whatsoever field, you name it. So again, generalizing it is a bit of a tricky job, so we really must not do that. But yes, there have been women leaders in Kashmir, for example, not been educated at all. They've not gone to any school, they've not been part of any formal education, but there are women who have actually championed the cause of upholding or preserving heritage, for example. There are women who are championing the cause of human rights at their own levels. There are women who are standing up and taking a call about gender violence, about abuse that they or any other person are experiencing. So that sense of leadership is there, but you kind of what needs to be done is you just have to tap that a bit. I talked about transformational leadership. That needs to be told that yes, you can be leaders, everyone can become a leader. So somebody who has not gone for higher education would not be able to do something in their lives. We're talking about women in education, but then confining leadership to just educated people is something we also should not do.
Thank you, Monisha, for those thoughts. A couple of points I would want to make. Obviously, we spoke of women leaders given the context of COVID. So, what are my 2 cents on the subject is like, if you have a society, like Arthur had initially said, that it's a certain strata of society that faces the brunt. Uh, Female leaders we had in Germany and New Zealand. So it also tells us a lot about the societies. Actually, the heads of states are females. So if you have an environment that promotes women in leadership, so this society does have a little some qualifications, and due credit to the women, of course. Secondly, you spoke of equality. Obviously, men and women are equal but not identical. So gauging them from the same yardstick is not fair to either gender. And thirdly, gender should not be a qualification for leadership. Your skill and your competence should be. So, like Monisha ma'am said, irrespective of men and women being in leadership roles, we should more be focused on how they perform and not their gender. Moving on to my next question is directed towards Arthur sir. So we traditionally, again, trading on a very sensitive matter here. I would be very careful with the words I use here. I don't want to sound biased towards either side. Women have traditionally a particular role in our society. Traditionally speaking, women are mothers and homemakers. If you go back a few years, So what I would say is, how do we enable women who are looking after children, taking care of their home chores? We have recently had an IIT where there was a crash for
Hello? Arif, we are not able to hear you.
children, exclude women in that education, educational growth.
Sorry, I was not able to hear you for the last part of your question. There was some
So
problem with the audio. Could you please repeat it?
Yeah, sure. I'm saying that, given can if not in classrooms, because we're discussing education and we're discussing solutions, if not in classrooms due to whatever reasons, due to women being homemakers or there being a restriction of movement of women, which is sad, obviously, but realistically speaking.
Well, first of all, I think women would be in a much better position to answer this question as to what kind of inhibitions or issues they find, catering to these two different jobs, because at the same time they are homemakers, and at the same time they have to, look after their jobs also in whichever sector it is. And it certainly is taxing, as we can all see. I mean, within our families also, where we see women who are working, so they do have additional responsibilities. There is the family responsibility, and then on top of that, there is the job-related responsibility as well. Role of men obviously would be to provide the support structure, and to some extent, as we do see that there are some changes that are taking place in societies. I'm not, as I said, I'm being very careful, because there are thousands of women out there who I don't want to belittle their pain, but to some extent, the changes are taking place, but we all do understand that these are very slow and gradual changes. And sometimes this is what we call as a generational changes. So it sometimes takes different generations, it sometimes takes generations to come for changes to take into effect. But having said that, let me also point out something else here also, that when we talk about social constructs, or when we talk about social roles, and this is something that, I'm grateful to my colleagues at IUST, because we do keep discussing a number of issues, so I've learned it from them as well. It's not just women who at times are at the receiving end. Men are also at the receiving end. So being the male panelist here, let me just point this out. For example, you take any profession. You take being a teacher, for example. So if a man is a teacher voluntarily, I can give you a guarantee that he has to hear from his family and relatives कि ये कौन सा profession choose कर लिया, why don't you do this, civil services में क्यों नहीं जाते, किसी और job में क्यों नहीं जाते. So or any other profession. Talk about a man who wants to be a painter, for example. Is there somebody who is into arts? So we just talked about women who traditionally take up art streams in universities. But what if there is a man somewhere who wants to be an artist? So the kind of pressure that men face, that also we need to take into account. I'm not certainly comparing the two. Let me put it, the caveat, let me put it out. The pressure that women have faced is far, far more than men have faced. But what I'm trying to point out is that these social constructs, when we create these social constructs, it can also impact men also, but sometimes we don't realize. Shazana would, we have discussed it in our office also. There may be situations where there may be a man who is emotional, who just wants to cry, but he can't, because एक तो trauma है, ऊपर से रोने लगेगा, तो instead of sympathizing, the 10 people around him would say कि क्या कर रहे हो, मर्द होके रोते हो. So he has to, bear the trauma, and he has to put up a very brave face that कि मुझे फर्क नहीं पड़ता. So, on a serious note, these social constructs are there. It affects men and women differently. But given our social structure, I do concede that women have to face the brunt of it. But the change that you're talking about, it just doesn't come overnight. It's a generational change. And if you look at the different generations, compare it with different generations, you do notice that there is a slow, gradual change. How future will unfold, nobody knows, but we all can hope for the best.
Yes, sir, rightly said. Actually, when we were discussing about having this panel, we thought earlier we thought that we'll have all the women in this panel and all the hosts will be females. But I personally wanted that we have a mixed and equal stage where even men like have their say. You have your side of the story. So thank you, sir, for that, for giving us that context also. Next question I would like to ask Shazana ma'am. Can you give us like 5 or 6 points that uh, men or women, like earlier the question would have been 5 points by through which women can like equip themselves today. But I would like to say in general, what do you think that the 5 things, 5 skills, or 5 qualities that currently a human being or a leader or an educationist should have so that we develop a better society?
I don't know where.
Ma'am, you are not audible. You have kept your mic on mute.
Yeah, so I don't know where the 5 came from, but I'll definitely try to talk about how we can equip ourselves. And firstly, I'd just like to talk about just a bit about what Athar sir said when he talked about men facing the same, I mean, not the same, but different variations of the same socialization process. We actually, in our course that we have designed and in our lectures, in every feminist lecture, you will have a topic on toxic masculinity and how masculinity is sometimes as toxic as this notion of feminine oppression. So masculinity is as toxic and can be as toxic as femininity, the whole concept that society has woven around all of this. So nobody denies the fact, but and it is a very important part of feminist studies as well. Toxic, it has a particular term for it, which is toxic masculinity. And yes, we do have lots of discussions about it as well, and we make it a point that in our gender class we definitely talk about toxic masculinity. And without and I think Diba, you made a very good decision, and by involving men as well,
Mm,
because they are 50% of the population, and when you're asking for your rights, you are asking for your rights from men.
mm,
So if you don't involve them and if you antagonize them, then there's really no structure. Then you're just creating an upheaval without a structure. And that's not the whole idea. That's not the idea of feminism or equality or equity, whatever you might want to call it. It's not the idea at all. So just to answer your question, if you could just repeat your specific question, please.
uh, Ma'am, I just want to know like the a few life skills that will help a man or a woman in current society to develop and nurture a better society, because we have discussed a lot of problems. So let us discuss solutions, let us discuss skills now.
Well, that's a very tough question to answer. And again, the answer lies in a transitional shift. And transitional shifts begin very slowly. These changes require tectonic shifts in cultural and structural understandings of societies. And sometimes you have to cut yourself loose from the moorings that societies have given you, because the moorings that you have attached yourself so strongly to are the ones that have kept you oppressed. So education is a very, very important and basic and internationally, nationally recognized skill that can empower you and make you, make you go forward in whatever you want to do. But only education is not enough. A cultural understanding, nuanced understanding of what it means for a woman to be empowered, as Munisa ma'am said, not every educated woman is empowered, and not every empowered woman is educated. So education is not the only tool that will help you to become empowered. The society, the societal norms, the socialization process has to change. And again, it's a work in progress. It's a transitional process. It's a generational process, as Athar sir said. So how do you change that? How do you change cultural understanding? You change that only by education, and also by pushing back gently, forcefully, coercively, by pushing back against stereotypes that have entered our minds, our attitudes, our behaviors. And I found your question, Arif, very interesting when you asked, are women better leaders or men? You know, it's all about individuals. And when you use these generic boxes of whether women are good leaders or men are good leaders, it kind of reinforces the stereotype. Our language is stereotypical. When we talk, our language is reinforced with so many stereotypes of how we live our lives every day. And so language needs to change, our thinking needs to change. And like I said, sometimes our attitude and our behavior needs to change. I'm not a votary of radical feminism. I'm not a votary of any kind of radical changes. I am a very strong votary of transitional changes. But sometimes the society needs a gentle pushback to understand that this is the limit where you are allowed to enter my life and no further. And I'll give you an interesting example, because when I entered Islamic University, I was there as assistant registrar. I was in the admin first, and I changed from admin to academics. And I was told by one of my colleagues, in fact, a few of my colleagues, that मैम जब आप assistant registrar थे, आप अच्छे नहीं थे. अब जब से आप professor बन गए हो, आप अच्छे बन गए हो. So I think that should tell you exactly where the problem lies. And Fatima Marnisi has, I'll wind up. Fatima Marnisi has very aptly put it when she says that when women enter the field of education, nobody will have a problem with it. So in fact, you will be encouraged, and society will be happy and thumping itself, patting itself on its back, saying that, you know, we're encouraging women to go there and work and earn for themselves and stuff. But once those very women enter the field of policy making, decision making, then all the patriarchal claws will come out, because decision making is where you make a difference. And that's where all these claws come out, and all these hidden biases and discriminatory attitudes come out. So I think cultural nuances need to change, socialization needs to change, family attitudes need to change, our own thinking needs to change, and education as a skill, as a tool, is a very, very good way, though not the only way of doing it.
Thank you so much, Sharvana ma'am, for that answer. In continuation to what you said, I would like to quote Vivekananda. You know, what he said, this is actually very interesting. To educate your women first and leave them to themselves. They will tell you what reforms are necessary. So this is very, relevant to whatever you said. Moving on, my next question I would like to direct it to Monisha ma'am. So we spoke heavily of women, the issues, and their subsequent solutions by institutional solutions or individual solutions or societal solutions. My question is, have we merely been doing women appeasement instead of actually women empowerment?
As all my colleagues from the university and all of you also have been speaking, there are certain terms which are heavily loaded. They are value-laden terms, and we have to be slightly careful while using those terms or championing their cause. We must. I am not somebody who would sloganeer for some of these terms, including women's empowerment. This term comes from a society which during the world wars when the men folk were out for war, they kind of asked their women to go and become doctors, nurses, and join all the fields where men were not available. And as soon as the wars ended and the men were back, they sent women back to the four walls of their houses. Inside their houses, they asked them to go back. There's no need for you to kind of be available and work. So terms like these come from them. If we look at our culture and especially rural areas, you would see that the head of the family, at times there are women who are actually in a controlling and dominating position, especially in some of the rural areas. And the culture has been like that. I remember my grandmother. I think she was the most strong person I ever met. She was a widow in her 20s, and she kind of kept everyone together and took everyone along. And I was speaking to someone today. She was not educated, but the way she would educate her children, my father never knew she was illiterate. So there has been something about our culture also which has kind of given some kind of power to women as well. So were they empowered? Yes, they were. Are we empowered? Probably we are not so empowered as as per the definition of women's empowerment or all these tools. But the thing is that we have to realize that traditions, culture at times imbibes a culture of silence. It gets comfortable by giving privilege to or controlling position to a sect or a group of individuals who are powerful, who derive their power from maybe whatever position they're holding in the society. And that kind of marginalizes a lot of other pockets, and women have been part of that, and increasingly so. So after this notion of women's empowerment started, you see that can we say that women's position in the, globally has improved? It has not. You see so many cases of violence happening every now and then. Maybe they are being reported more now as compared to what they were earlier on, but there are issues which are getting grimmer and darker by every passing day. So the point is that one must realize that patriarchy is real. One must realize that gender mainstreaming is highly required, especially in the field of education, and giving opportunities to women. There are Millennium Development Goals, then you have Sustainable Development Goals. All of these do have women's gender equality or things like that at the forefront. They are considered as some of the most important goals that need to be achieved for the whole of the world. And we also probably really need to imbibe all of them and try and navigate our own policies, our own way of dealing. Our workplace culture, for example, has to kind of maneuver around all these goals and see if we are attending to that. And if there is a realization on part of individuals, men more than the women, or even women at the same time, because women are not aware of entitlements. They're not aware of their own rights. For example, there is a necessity of having a gender of a committee or a cell within every higher educational institute which kind of caters to problems or complaints against gender violence. But are students aware of that? Are employees aware of that? Are women employees, for example, filing complaints against any cases of violence or abuse that they're experiencing at workplace? No, they're not. Probably they're not aware. And the other part of the problem is that the culture of silence, which comes from homes, it kind of discourages them from speaking up or raising those queries at the end of the day. And curriculum, for example, there's a problem with the way curriculum has been designed. It's not really gender friendly curriculum at times. For talking about things like eve teasing, you really have to kind of bring in an example which is out of a context for that particular class. But since a lot of problems which are real for women, which are real for other genders also, let's not just talk about women, but for all the genders. They're not there. You don't see all these things, all these issues being discussed. So where would these groups go? They'll end up being marginalized at the end of the day. So policies, curriculum really has to kind of, be aware of the issues around, and there has to be a revision of policies. There has to be a revision of how we operate on day-to-day basis. If some slogans were relevant back then, probably they're not relevant at all right now. So probably we really need to revise and revisit a lot of things.
Yes, definitely, ma'am. Meanwhile, we are also getting a lot of comments from the live session. Professor Ejaz Rasool Mattu, he's conveying his regards to all of you, and he says he's missing you and he's excited to see all of you there. And there are many other students and alumni who are there watching this program. I would like to ask the last question again to Dr. Monisa, because she is also the proctor of Islamic University, that how has what necessary steps has Islamic University done, or so that we have a gender biased, non-unbiased environment? And for example, there is a sexual harassment committee. Apart from that, what are the other steps that you have taken in the university to remove these biases and this and to make a general happy and a developing university?
Well, we used to have one proctor earlier on, and it's a recent thing, just a couple of years, into it, that we started having a proctorial team in which a woman is also also there. So I am the female proctor, and because university felt that there is a need to attend to issues or grievances that especially students, female students, or even colleagues, my colleagues from teaching or non-teaching may have, in order to reach out to them. We've been trying to kind of give confidence to girls, and even during these days, though we can't really physically go out and meet students, so I've been trying to, whosoever I can reach. I can't reach every student right now. So I spoke to some students, on phone and other things, and actually discussed few things, and vis-a-vis, some kind of gender related, whatever they were feeling harassment of some degree. And there are clear directions from the university also to take all these things very seriously. There have been some cases in the last couple of years, not much, because as I said earlier, that girls are generally very, very, maybe shy, maybe scared to come out and speak about certain issues like that. But wherever it has happened, we've tried to redress, and I actually sit with them and I speak to those girls, and we give them a bit of confidence that they can. And obviously it's going to be anonymous, or we're not really going to reveal their names in order to, whatever, address all the concerns that they have. But there's a lot that needs to be done. At the time of admissions, for example, this year I'm not too sure if we can go and meet our new students physically, but we do go to them every class, every department of the university, and we inform them, share contact details, and tell them that if there are issues, you must always try and reach out. But probably we need to do more. We need to reach out more and create more opportunities and avenues for them connecting with the university. If I give you an example of this thing happening at the highest level, the Vice Chancellor of the university is ever so open and available and accessible to even students, and we often hear a lot of times that students directly mail him about different issues, whether that's about academics or things like these. But so far, probably not many students, not many girls have actually informed us about these issues. but we are there. And trust me, at times I tell girls that I will support you, and I am a bit more biased towards you if you come up with some things like that, because that's what will probably help create an atmosphere where girls would be comfortable speaking about issues related to sexual harassment and other things. Otherwise they would just not feel comfortable, like they're they shut out at their own homes at times.
Thank you, Monisha ma'am, for those thoughts. Before you answered Deepa's question, you spoke heavily of certain sections being marginalized and of inclusivity. So what I have to say about the the topic point is marginal people could be anybody. It does not have to be based on your gender. So even if there is a female in a position of power, there is a possibility of females being against females, being biased based on certain other, criteria. It works differently. When people have power, how they said that absolute power corrupts absolutely. So I don't think it mentions gender anyway. So moving on now, we will be taking closing remarks from the panel about Ms. Monisha Kazi might have something to add to it regarding the university and the alumni council. So if you could, throw some light on that.
You asked me to go first?
Yeah, you can go first.
Well, I think it's important to talk about these issues because the more we talk about all these issues, the comfortable society and we, collectively will become with topics like these, and probably, marginalized groups and sections, be it any gender, be it any race, would come up and probably participate. And inclusion is very important. So I would really look forward to more of inclusivity in future as well. I really appreciate the fact that you held this discussion today. And also it gives me a chance to kind of send out a word to all the alumni. We are really, really proud of all the students, who have, graduated from IUST, the university, all the faculty, everybody in university is highly, highly proud and, of whatever you are doing in your own fields. But what I would request each one of you is, wherever you are, whatever you are doing right now, the university needs to know, the world needs to know. There's a general belief around that probably some institutions in the state are doing well, while as few are not doing so well when it comes to alumni and where they're working. And though people do know that they identify university more with your work through your achievements, so try and make it slightly more visible. So I would request each one of you to kind of prepare a video of yourselves, talk about the most important and memorable moments that you had in university. I'm in the process of collecting all of those videos, and I'd be really, really happy to have that in my email, or you can pass it through alumni council. And the university really, really looks forward to building stronger ties with alumni, and it's time that we kind of connect with each one of you, and you would see a lot happening on this front. Very shortly we'll have our own association in place, which has been, the homework has been done for quite some time, and unless it was done in a foolproof manner, we would not have really come out and talked about this. So you'll hear about that also, but we really need your support and your hand holding on different areas. So wherever you are, just connect back with the university. And thank you so much for today.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. Now I would like to ask Mr. Athar to give some closing remarks.
Well, thank you. In closing remarks, I would like only to say two things. First of all, as I've been saying, regarding the topic at hand that we were discussing, that please don't generalize things. We need, as I keep saying, we need to look at the issues at the level of an individual or at the level of communities, because by generalizing things, we often tend to overlook the specific issues that are faced by those who can't get their voices heard. So individualization and localization is, something that I would strongly stress upon. Second, as far as this particular initiative is concerned, I'm extremely delighted and very happy that you have taken this initiative. To be frank, when I received a call from Shoaib, he talked to me about this, and I was very nervous, and if I may even use the word, very reluctant to come on the panel because it was not my area of quote unquote expertise. But since the call had come from the alumni of IUST saying no was not an option. So that's what I'm saying, is that whatever initiatives the alumni takes, we would be delighted to support as much as we can. So keep up the good work, and I look forward to other programs that you conduct in this series.
Thank you so much, sir. I still remember the classes which we took in our first year, and you were the faculty there.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember that.
For those people, sorry to interrupt you, but for those people who are not familiar with Dr. Athar, he used to teach us ethics, and sir, that's one of the reasons why we have you on the panel. We needed to have somebody who was who actually was aware of
Thanks a lot. It was very good to see
you. And I actually
have
been getting a lot of text messages that from friends and from my friends and colleagues, fellow students, that ethics was one class which was very, very interactive. It was something, it was not always right, it was not always wrong, so it was very open to discussion classroom. And personally, I still remember John Rawls' theory of justice. That's one thing he taught us very well. That's a very that it goes back almost 10 years now, 8 years it has been, and I still remember it pretty clearly.
Thank you. I'm really thankful.
And I think the reluctance would probably, we would have your own reasons, but we had no reason to not to have you on the panel.
Thanks a lot.
So Shazana ma'am, if we could have your closing remarks, and then we could wind up.
I'd just like to say that the very fact that we are here and this interaction has been convened by you on this particular topic means that IUST has done something right, and that you've been taught well. So I'm very happy about that. I'm happy that we've done something well. And as I always say in my gender class, if only 1 or 2 of the males understand what it's all about, then I think our work is in progress, and it's progressing well. Another thing, marginalization is not based on gender, but women are marginalized because of their gender. So that you cannot separate the two. If women are marginalized on the basis of their gender, then that needs special attention. And also that special attention needs to be given to toxic masculinity as well, because alienating men from this struggle, and may I emphasize that this struggle, the struggle of equality or equity of women, is not a war against men. And it's a disclaimer and a caveat that I give every time I talk about gender and gender equality. It's not a war against men. Let's not make it that. Because unless we all come together, it's a joint exercise that the whole society has to come together to bring the society, to take the society forward. And in a joint exercise, you have to bring men and women together in order for the society to progress to some level of satisfaction. And it's a work in progress. And thank you very much. And like I said, let me congratulate ourselves as well. We've done something well to have students like you bring up topics like these.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much,
everybody, for taking out the time. And before we leave, general request to the IUST alumni. We have been working on creating a database, and please fill in the registration form. We'll have a network, and then moving on, we can have inclusivity, like we have been using that word a lot. Also, we are thankful to Web Plastics, who are in collaboration for this particular discussion, and it actually is a startup from one of our alumnus. So this word goes out to Yunus. Thank you so much and all the best. And thank you very much for joining us. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.